sat there, staring at the pavement, trying to process what had just happened. This was my reality now. My daughter was in a hospital room, and I was alone, figuring out how to give her the best chance at recovery without the support I had hoped for. The weight of their refusal sat heavy in my chest. It wasn't just about the money, it was about family and what that meant, about the promises and expectations we hold on to. I had always believed that in moments of crisis, family would come together, but here I was, feeling abandoned at the worst possible time. I remember thinking about all the times I had gone out of my way to help them, whether it was lending money when they needed it or being there when they were sick. It felt like a punch in the gut to realize that when I needed them the most, they prioritized a vacation over my daughter's health. The words they said kept echoing in my mind, especially the part about the vacation being a family thing, as if Illa and I weren't part of that family. I felt a mix of anger and hurt, and yet I couldn't bring myself to confront them. It wasn't in my nature to argue or create drama, so instead, I sat there, letting the emotions wash over me. Eventually, I got up and went back inside. I had to find a way to make this work. I spent the next few hours making calls, reaching out to friends, looking into every possible option to gather the funds. It wasn't easy, and I had to swallow my pride more times than I can count, but my focus was on Illa and nothing else. As the hours ticked by, I managed to scrape together just enough to cover the cost of the surgery. I felt a sense of relief mixed with exhaustion. I knew it was only a temporary solution, and I would have to deal with the financial repercussions later, but at that moment, all that mattered was getting Illa the care she needed. The surgery went ahead as planned. I spent those hours pacing the hospital corridors, clutching my phone just in case there was any news. The wait was unbearable, but I kept reminding myself that I had done everything I could. When the surgeon finally came out to speak with me, his expression was reassuring. The procedure had been successful, and Illa was stable. Relief flooded through me, and I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to let go of some of the tension that had been gripping me for days. But even though the surgery was over, the emotional aftermath lingered. I found myself replaying the conversation with my parents over and over in my head, trying to understand their perspective, but it always came back to the same feeling of betrayal. It was a pivotal moment in my life, one that shifted the way I viewed family and support. It was as if a line had been drawn and I could no longer see them in the same light. I realized that sometimes the people you expect to be there for you aren't, and you have to find the strength within yourself to keep moving forward. In the days that followed, I stayed by Illa's side, watching her slowly recover. She was a fighter, and her resilience inspired me to keep pushing through my own challenges. I knew that we had a long road ahead, both in terms of her physical recovery and the financial strain it had put us under, but I also knew that we would face it together. I was determined to be the support system she needed, even if it meant doing it alone. As I sat there holding her hand, I promised myself that I would always prioritize her needs, no matter what sacrifices it required. She was my world, and I would do anything to ensure her happiness and health. I remember that day so vividly. I was sitting on a park bench, watching a pigeon limp across the sidewalk. It was such a simple scene, but my mind was racing. I found myself wondering if that pigeon had a name, if it had parents who cared about it, if they would have paid for surgery to fix its little leg if they could. It was a silly thought, maybe, but it stuck with me. I was lost in this train of thought, letting the world blur around me, until I finally got up and made my way back inside. I had a task at hand, something much bigger than a limping pigeon. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen for a moment. The emergency loan form was right there, waiting for me. It wasn't hard to fill out, just one of those things that required you to click through endless agreements and terms. Click here, click there. Accept this, agree to that. It was mind-numbing, but I needed the money. So I clicked away, feeling a mix of desperation and resignation. When I submitted it, I waited, hoping against hope that it would be enough. The approval came, but it wasn't what I needed. Without a cosigner, I'd only get a third of the amount. It was a blow, but it wasn't unexpected. I had been here before. Reluctantly, I did what I had promised myself I wouldn't do again. I called my parents. This time, my dad picked up. I explained the situation, told him about the loan and how I just needed a cosigner. I assured him he wouldn't have to pay a cent. I would handle everything. There was a pause on the other end, one of those long, uncomfortable silences that say more than words ever could. My parents were always good at those. Finally, he spoke. They had talked it over, he said, and they weren't comfortable putting their names on any financial paperwork right now. The uncertainty, he called it. It stung, hearing it put so plainly. Uncertainty. As if my daughter's spinal cord and our desperate need weren't real enough. My father went on about identity theft and online lenders, his voice calm and reasonable. I tried to argue that it was a bank, a safe option, but it was no use. He apologized, and I knew he meant it, but it didn't change the outcome. I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and thanked him anyway. Hanging up, I felt something shift inside me. Up to that point, I was just a mom in crisis, trying to hold it all together. But that moment in my kitchen, phone in hand, I transformed. I became a woman with nothing left to lose, and a daughter who needed me to fight for her. It was like a light bulb flicked on, and suddenly all the pieces of my past clicked into place, forming a picture I had been avoiding for too long. Sitting in that hospital waiting room later, fueled by vending machine coffee and a burning sense of determination, I realized my parents were exactly who they had always been. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Growing up, I used to tell people I had a normal family. We were middle class, not perfect, but not dramatic either. Just your average family with budget vacations and a bit of passive aggression sprinkled in. We had rules, lots of them. Don't talk back, don't cry in public, don't expect praise for doing the right thing. That one was my dad's favorite. You don't get a trophy for being decent, he'd say. Funny, coming from a man who once broke down because his steak was overcooked on Father's Day. I was the firstborn, the experiment, if you will. Then came my sister Megan, and everything changed. She got the spotlight, the new clothes, the better toys. I asked once why her Barbie was perfect while mine was missing a foot. Mom just shrugged and said they were in a better financial place now. It was as if 2 years had somehow spanned a generation. As we grew older, the favoritism only intensified. Megan got private dance lessons and a grand sweet 16. I got a cupcake from a gas station and a lecture about gratitude. I didn't protest. I convinced myself that maybe things really had changed financially. Maybe this was just how life worked. Some of us were meant to cheer from the sidelines while our siblings got the deluxe version of childhood. But then I turned 20 and got pregnant. Suddenly, I wasn't just the overlooked older sister, I was the family's cautionary tale. Layla's father was a mistake I corrected quickly. He was verbally abusive, manipulative, and broken in ways I couldn't fix. When I left him, I thought naively that my parents would stand by me. Maybe they'd say they were proud of me for standing up for myself. Instead, Mom asked if I was planning to move back in. When I said no, she seemed relieved. They didn't offer help, not once. No babysitting, no questions about how I was coping. They stayed on the sidelines, treating me as if I had embarrassed them in front of an audience that wasn't even watching. I worked hard to make ends meet. During the week, I was in HR. On weekends, I coached clients, and Isla often came along. She'd sit quietly in the back, coloring, never complaining, never asking why Grandma never called. I think she understood early on that love in our family came with strings, and that she wasn't the favored one. So I made it work. I never asked them for money. Not when the rent went up, not when Isla needed braces, not even during the flu that had me questioning my own sanity. Over time, the roles reversed. My parents retired and downsized, and I found myself wondering if they'd ever see things from my perspective. I remember the day we moved into that condo with the rooftop hot tub. It was supposed to be this fresh start, a way to make life a bit more comfortable. Dad claimed it was for his back pain, and Mom was always going on about how the lighting in the guest bathroom at the old place didn't do her any favors, so it seemed like an upgrade for everyone. I quietly started pitching in here and there, some extra cash to help with the mortgage, covering little expenses. It wasn't something I kept track of. To me, that's just what family does. You help each other out. I always thought they'd do the same for me if I ever needed it. But I learned the hard way that I was wrong. Megan, my sister, she never contributed. Not once. Yet her kids seemed to get everything handed to them. New laptops, ski trips, even an in-ground trampoline in their backyard. Who really needs a trampoline set into the earth? But they had one. Then, my grandmother, Margaret, passed away. She was different from anyone else I knew, smart, straightforward, and a bit intimidating with her ability to calculate compound interest like it was nothing. It was like she and Isla, my daughter, had this special connection. They'd spend endless hours discussing investment plans. I never quite got it, but I was glad someone recognized Isla's brilliance. When Grandma died, I just assumed everything she had would go to my parents. They acted like it was a given. There was no talk about a will, no family meetings, just a vague statement that everything was taken care of. Suddenly, they were flush with cash, trips to Greece, luxury handbags, and then Megan's kids got gifted a brand new car. Not just any car, but a sleek SUV with a giant bow on top. It was like watching a commercial. That was the moment I stopped helping them financially. It seemed pointless, but I didn't say a word. I let it slide until the day of Layla's accident. When I was sitting in that hospital room, I made a call. I needed help, and I asked my parents. Their response floored me. It wasn't just a simple no. They made me feel like I was the problem, like I was being impulsive for wanting the safer surgery. You know, the one with actual success rates. It was like they thought I was making some rash financial decision in the midst of trauma and paperwork. I hung up and realized something I should have seen long before. They didn't help because they didn't care. Not in the way people pretend to care. Not how families are supposed to care. They helped when it was convenient, when they could be praised for it. Megan would post a thank you online with sparkly emojis, and that was enough for them. But me, I was too self-reliant, too quiet, too unwilling to beg. And Isla, she was never truly theirs in their eyes. Not the way Megan's kids were. Not the way they wanted their legacy to look. But Isla doesn't need their legacy. She has her own, and they're not part of it. The worst part wasn't the rejection. It was what came after. The dead silence while my mom said, "I'm sorry, honey, I really am. But we're not comfortable tying our name to something like that." Something like that meant saving their granddaughter. I didn't scream or throw my phone. I just sat there, staring ahead, hoping I could somehow will money into existence. I don't know how long I stayed frozen like that. But eventually, I stopped breathing through grief and started breathing through rage. I had done everything right. I worked hard, saved, helped them when they needed it. I asked for nothing in return. And when I finally asked for one thing, just a signature, they suddenly couldn't take a risk. But they could take 3 children to an all-inclusive resort where even the towels probably had their own butler. Fine. They wanted me to be the quiet, capable daughter, the one who doesn't make a scene. Not this time. That afternoon, I opened my phone, bypassed every number that shared my DNA, and started reaching out to everyone else. I started with the mom of Isla's friend from theater club. We had chatted once during intermission. I wasn't even sure she remembered me. But I called anyway. I introduced myself, explained the situation. Isla was in the hospital due to an accident. She would be fine, but we needed surgery, the good one. It was expensive. I knew it was crazy to ask, but I did. Before I could even finish, she said yes. And it wasn't just her. I reached out to a retired teacher I hadn't seen in years. She offered to send what she could from her pension. A former coworker, someone I hadn't spoken to in a decade, sent me $300 with a note that simply said, "For a don't worry about it." Isla's violin teacher shared our situation in a private group chat. A woman I'd never met showed up at the hospital with snacks, toothbrushes, and a $50 bill tucked into a sympathy card. People came out of the woodwork, not family, not the people who raised me, just everyone else. And it wasn't cozy, it wasn't warm and fuzzy. It was humbling. I remember sitting in that sterile hospital bathroom, the walls echoing with my own sobs. It was the fifth call that broke me, not because of the financial burden, but because it highlighted the stark reality that these strangers, people who owed me nothing, were stepping up for Ela more than my own parents ever had in 18 years. That kind of humiliation, it changes you. It didn't crush me, it ignited something. Every phone call became an act of rebellion. Each time I awkwardly asked for help, each embarrassed breath I took was a small act of defiance. They wanted me to quietly fade away, to not make waves, but I was determined to stay afloat. I started a spreadsheet, a way to keep track of who I needed to repay and a way to keep myself from falling apart. Every name on that list was a tiny defiance against those who had turned their backs. I had just closed the spreadsheet when the hospital door opened. Isa's best friend and her mom walked in. Her mom didn't say anything at first. She just handed me a credit card and said, $20,000 limit. Use what you need. My hands shook as I tried to give it back, mumbling something about interest rates and repayment plans. She stopped me and said, "You're a good mom. Let people be good to you." I was at a loss for words, but she was right. Because of that generosity, the surgery was paid for in full, and I signed the consent forms with a borrowed pen, my hand trembling the whole time. Isa went into surgery with the best team and the best chance. Yet not a single word from my parents, unless you count the whispers that began when people found out. Some of the people I'd called knew my parents. They'd seen the Facebook photos of cruises and luxury vacations. And when the news got out that those same people refused to help their granddaughter, the whispers turned into a loud murmur. I didn't post anything, but someone did. Maybe it was Isa's friend, maybe a neighbor, maybe even Karma. All I know is 3 days later, my mom called me 6 times in a row with no voicemail, just endless rings. My dad texted, "Call us immediately." But I had bigger concerns like keeping Isa alive. That's when the other call came, not from a friend or family, but from a lawyer, a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Hi, Helen, it's Greg, Margaret's attorney. I heard about Isa. I'm sorry, but I need to ask you something. Did your daughter ever get access to her inheritance?" I was stunned. What inheritance? There was a long pause on the line, and then he simply said, "Huh." That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. That call was the crack that split everything open. What I discovered was that my parents hadn't just let me down. They had betrayed Isa in the worst possible way. 2 weeks after the surgery, I was standing across the street from my parents' house, holding the envelope that would upend their lives. It was early evening, the sun low enough to sting my eyes, but I didn't care. I welcomed the distraction from the constant nausea that had settled in my stomach since Greg's call. My parents were due back from an extravagant cruise that day, and I tracked their return flight like it was a NASA mission. Isa sat next to me in the passenger seat, her legs propped up, lost in her own world of earbuds and mindless scrolling. She didn't ask questions. She knew why we were there. She simply said she didn't want to talk to them, and I assured her she wouldn't have to. She nodded and went back to her screen. It was only 10 minutes later when their car pulled up. My mom stepped out first, wearing a flowing white dress, the kind that screams, privilege. My dad followed, dragging a suitcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They didn't notice us until I opened my car door. My mom froze in her tracks. I walked across the street, the envelope in my hand, my heels crunching on their immaculate gravel driveway. She looked at me warily and asked what it was. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You've been served," I said. My dad, who was busy with the trunk, looked up and saw the envelope. His voice cracked when he said, "You're joking." But I didn't say another word. I just turned around and walked back to the car. Behind me, I heard my mother scream my name, and my dad said something, but it was lost to the wind. I remember the day it all started. It was like any other until that phone call with Greg. I never expected it to change everything the way it did. You know, it's funny how you can go through life thinking everything is one way and suddenly, in a snap, you realize it's not. Greg's voice on the other end of the line was calm, almost too calm, when he asked why Illa didn't receive the inheritance. It was like he was pointing out a glaring error in the universe. I tried to explain, fumbling over my words, that my parents got everything: the house, the stocks, even that old coin collection that no one cared about but Grandma thought was a treasure trove. Greg went silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the disbelief filling the space between us. He said it didn't make sense, and when he mentioned he had written the will himself, my heart dropped. It was all in a trust, meant for Illa when she turned 18. She was supposed to have it all. The realization and the betrayal were overwhelming. My parents, the people who raised me, had kept it all. They had dipped into what wasn't theirs to fund their lifestyle, their little luxuries, without a second thought. When I confronted Illa with the truth, I braced myself for an explosion of emotion. But there was nothing, just silence. I watched her absorb the news, arms crossed, face unreadable, and it was like she had been unplugged from the world. She finally spoke, her voice empty, pointing out how they said they loved her, and shared all those moments that now felt hollow. I wanted to comfort her, to say something that would make it better, but words failed me. The silence was louder than any scream. She wanted to know if there was something we could do, and I promised her that we could. The next morning, I called Greg again. He laid out the path ahead: paperwork, legal proceedings, maybe even a court battle. Illa listened, her resolve hardening with every word. She was determined to reclaim what was rightfully hers and hold them accountable. Greg warned us about the possible fallout, but Illa didn't waver. Her resolve was unshakable. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal jargon and strategy meetings. Greg was more than just a lawyer. He was a force of nature determined to set things right. He had a personal connection to Grandma, and it drove him as much as our determination did. For the first time, someone saw Illa as more than just a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Greg understood that this was about more than just money. It was about integrity, about righting a wrong, about standing up for what is just. The betrayal felt like a wound that wouldn't close, knowing that my parents had chosen their comfort over their own granddaughter's future. They had seen her as an inconvenience rather than the wonderful person she is. It was maddening, and the injustice of it all fueled my resolve. I couldn't let this go unanswered. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. As the trial approached, I could see the change in Illa. She was no longer the uncertain teenager grappling with betrayal. She had grown into someone who understood the power of standing up for herself. Watching her in court was like watching a warrior go into battle. She was calm and composed, and her strength radiated from her. Meanwhile, my parents showed up with a lawyer who seemed more concerned with appearances than justice. His arguments were flimsy, grasping at straws, trying to paint the will as unfair and Grandma as confused. But Greg was relentless. He had everything we needed: bank records, emails, the original will. Grandma's words about Ella reminded me so much of the connection they shared. It was undeniable proof of Grandma's intentions. Their lawyer tried to spin a story about how my parents were merely safeguarding the money, but Greg dismantled their arguments effortlessly. He questioned their motives, their actions, their silence. Why hadn't they mentioned the trust? Why had they spent the money on themselves? The evidence was damning, and there was no escaping the truth. As I sat there, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also pride in Illa for standing her ground. She was the epitome of resilience, and I realized that no matter the outcome, she had already won by choosing to fight for what was right. I never imagined I'd be sitting here, in front of a camera, sharing this part of my life. But sometimes the truth needs to be told, even if it's difficult. This is my story, and it's a part of me now. It all began when I found out that my parents had been hiding something significant from me. I should have seen the signs, but I was too trusting, too naive. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a harsh reality I wasn't prepared for. The courtroom was silent, and I could feel the tension in the air. The judge had to ask for silence twice. First, because my parents were whispering furiously to each other, and then because Ela, my sister, laughed quietly under her breath. It was a bitter laugh, one that spoke volumes about the situation we found ourselves in. When the verdict was delivered, it felt surreal. The court ordered my parents to repay every last cent of what was rightfully Ela's. They were found guilty of breaching fiduciary duty and misusing the funds. It was a legal and moral blow they couldn't dodge. The realization hit them hard. They no longer had the money. They'd spent a substantial portion, not all, but enough that their current assets couldn't cover the debt. Everything was seized: the house, the car, retirement accounts, even the so-called art collection my mom used to boast about. They ended up in a cramped rental near a freeway, a place where you don't open windows if you want to sleep through the night. Our extended family cut contact and their friends ghosted them. Yet, despite everything, they hadn't apologized. They'd torn our family apart. My mom reportedly told a neighbor who asked why they were selling their furniture on Facebook Marketplace that Ella had ruined the family. But Ella wasn't celebrating. She was just resolved, clear in her mind. One night, she confided in me, saying they didn't just steal money. They risked her life, and still they expected her to get over it. I couldn't argue with that. She was right. A week later, Ela gave Greg, her lawyer, the green light to proceed with criminal charges. Greg simply nodded, acknowledging the weight of her decision. It wasn't going to be easy, he warned. But Ela was undeterred. In her words, she'd already walked tougher paths. To my surprise, the criminal case moved faster than I expected. It seemed to gain momentum, perhaps because someone leaked part of the civil case summary, and the media latched onto it. Or maybe, just maybe, the DA genuinely cared. Whatever the reason, the case was gaining traction. Their new attorney was no less dramatic than the last, loud, overpriced, and increasingly frantic. I found myself wondering how they were even affording him. They pointed fingers in every direction, at Grandma, the financial system, the bank, the pressures of retirement. At one point, they even tried the "we thought she'd squander it" defense, which earned a very visible eye roll from the judge. The verdict was damning: guilty, financial theft, breach of fiduciary duty, deception involving an illegal heir. Due to their age and the fact that the crime was nonviolent, the judge sentenced them to 1 year of probation and community service. Instead of enjoying sunsets in Santorini, they were now collecting trash and organizing documents at city offices. Photos of them surfaced online, my mother in a neon orange vest, scowling at a fast food wrapper like it had personally insulted her, and my father looking helpless, broom in hand. We didn't share the images, but we certainly saw them. Then Greg called again. "Are you sitting down?" he asked. It turns out my parents had attempted to move a significant sum from accounts they had failed to disclose during the civil case, funneling the money into an offshore platform under my aunt's name. There was a digital trail leading straight back to them. "It's a clear violation of the court order," Greg said. "We're filing again." The second trial didn't drag. Fraud, intent to conceal assets, attempting to avoid repayment. This time, they came to court dressed in the same outfits they wore for community service. For once, my mother said nothing. My father didn't look at anyone. Even their lawyer kept a flat expression. The judge sentenced them to 1 year in actual prison, no suspension, no plea deal, no loophole. They were handcuffed in front of us and escorted out of the courtroom. No one rose, no one objected, no one shed a tear. I didn't feel triumph. I felt justice and something else, something gentler. Relief. Isa finally received the remainder of her inheritance. It wasn't the full amount, but it was still enough to change her life. She cleared her medical debts, set aside funds for college, and then, without even consulting me, opened an investment account. She called it the Compound Project, a quiet tribute to Grandma. I asked if she planned to use the money soon. She smiled and said, "It's not for now, it's for something good later." When the final documents arrived, she handled the filing herself. She added just one handwritten line to the folder. And some people don't deserve forgiveness, just consequences. I didn't write a word in response. I only nodded. Too far or just far enough? You tell me. Either way, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and stay tuned.